Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium, and here we explore life, death, consciousness, and what it all means. Today I have a Q&A, but before I get started, I just wanted to ask you all something. This is really difficult for me to do. I, like most people, have a hard time asking for help in certain areas of my life, not in others, but certainly in this area. So I've been creating this podcast for 2.5 years now, and I love it. I love interviewing my guests. I love reading my guest books. I love reading their articles they're publishing. And I have so many potential guests that have been contacting me to reach out that I could probably fill podcasts until 2025, at least. So, and all of this has grown completely organically because of you, because you have shared the podcast, because you have told friends about the podcast, you've told family about the podcast, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. So thank you. I also love receiving your ghost stories and having your questions, hearing your questions, and hearing how the show has impacted you, how it's opened you up, how it's changed you. Often what brings you to the podcast is some sort of catalyst of loss of usually a close loved one. So I'm grateful that you have found the podcast to be healing. And hopefully you get a sense from me how important it is that this show has a lot of integrity, and that my guests who I bring on have a lot of integrity and are well researched in what they do. Obviously not all the time, because I do have some fun shows that are a little bit more based in just people's personal experiences and things along those lines. But I want to continue to dive deeper into what you all are curious about, while also presenting that scientific perspective as well to sort of balance all of this out. So far, I've been able to do all of this without any ads, and I would like to ideally keep it that way, but I do need to find a way to cover my expenses. So here's my ask. If you love the show, I would love for you to show the show some love. So if you aren't able to contribute, I completely understand. I know this year has been really challenging and really tough, and everybody's in different places. And please continue to enjoy the podcast and share the podcast. But if you are able to contribute at some level, I would really appreciate you heading over to Patreon. It's patreon.com/Dr. Amy Robbins, or you can just Google Patreon and then put my name in. And this will always be in my show notes as well moving forward. And the way Patreon works is Patreon is a membership platform. And I did this a while back, but I've really wanted to offer people who do give some money to support the show a little bit more in return. So for $5 a month, you get access to help me determine the direction that you want the content to go. So this is an opportunity to weigh in on different topics that you want covered, different things. Maybe you have a guest you want me to seek out and see if they'll be on the show. So that's what you get for $5 a month, which I guess is less than 2 cups of coffee maybe? I'm not a coffee drinker, so I don't know. For $10 a month, I'm super excited that I finally have been able to pull content together from many of the after the show discussions. So I spend a lot of time talking with my guests after the show, sometimes before, but the juicier stuff comes after. And this content has been created and pulled out for you to see and hear. So for the $10 a month, you'll get access to a lot of this behind the scenes footage. Often the conversations are very rich and very juicy. I just cut them out for the purpose of the show. And for $20 a month, you will get those two things as well as a quarterly Q&A with me. So I'll do a live Q&A for about a half hour, maybe longer. I'm not going to be wedded to any time, but just to talk with you all. If you have questions to ask me, I'll be happy to answer those. And this is going to be a real way for us to begin to interact. So I'm excited to offer all of these different ways for you to contribute to the podcast. And if you can only contribute $1 or 50 cents one time, that's fine too. Anything will be very much appreciated. Or if you want to contribute differently, you can certainly reach out to me at dramyrobbins.com, at dramyrobbins@gmail.com, or DM me on Instagram. And to everybody, I just want to thank you for sharing the podcast and encourage you to continue sharing the podcast with anyone who you think would be interested. Follow me on Instagram, subscribe to my newsletter where I do once a month or twice a month soul wisdom, where I just sit and channel information and bring that to you. And you can also subscribe to my YouTube channel. So these are all different ways that you can help support me. And again, thank you so much for being such an important part of my life. I may have not met you yet. I may have corresponded with you once or twice, but no matter what, I just want you all to know how grateful I am for you supporting and listening to the podcast. So that is it for my little PSA today. And now I would like to talk to you all about a Q&A that I received. So this Q&A has come a couple of times in different forms, but the question is from a woman named Sarah and also a woman named Donna, and it has to do with this notion of souls reincarnated. So Sarah had asked, if someone you lost decides to get reincarnated, then you can't communicate with them, correct? Wow. Okay, so this is a really complicated question, and it kind of dovetails with what Donna asked, which is, if someone passes and their soul is in heaven and they reincarnate, does that mean they will be born into a different body? So how can a soul be in a different body because that's not still that same person? I will start with the first question first, which is this notion of communicating with someone who has reincarnated. And again, this is complicated. I'm still working on trying to get someone who does quantum physics on the show to explain probably alternate realities and what is time, because I think that this all plays into it. But it is my understanding that you can still communicate with a soul who is on the other side and a soul who is embodied in a physical body, because souls are just energy. And so you're communicating with energy, not a person. And I think this is complicated often for us to understand, because when we think of communication, we think of mouths moving and that's what we hear. But when we're communicating on a soul level, we're communicating more telepathically, right? We're having those clairs, claircognizance, clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairaudience. And so we don't necessarily need the physical body to communicate with someone. And they could also be in a physical body and also their soul could be in multiple places simultaneously. Don't ask me how that happens. Again, I'm looking for a professional who can come on and explain that, but that is my understanding at this point. And to answer the question about so you can still communicate with souls who are back in a physical body because their energy is now in a physical body, but that doesn't mean you can't communicate with that energy. So hopefully that makes sense and doesn't confuse people more. If a soul were to reincarnate, would it be born into a different body? Yes. Obviously, our physical body dies, our soul continues on. That is at least my belief. I don't understand how a soul can be in a different body because it's not her, right? It is not physically her, but the essence of who that person is, the soul, right? I don't know how else you just describe soul, but soul, you can feel that person's soul carry on. And I don't know if anybody follows Amanda Klutz. She's a woman who lost her husband with COVID. And she actually recently on one of her Instagram stories described this experience where it was almost like her husband's soul came into her son's physical body. And it was the most powerful experience. But, we've all seen this in movies, if you've seen Ghost and things like that, where souls can take over other people's physical bodies. We don't hear of this often, but is it possible? I would imagine that it is. So that's one piece of this. And then our souls come back as different people. Again, they come back in a different physical body, but how do you define different people? They're still working to live out the same lessons. They're still working to work through those same obstacles if they did not overcome them in a previous incarnation. And this again is where the past life thread comes in, right? Like you're carrying that soul with you or that soul is being reincarnated life after life to work through some of those lessons. Yes, in a different physical body, of course, because their body dies, but the soul comes back. So again, hopefully this helped, didn't confuse you more. If you have questions, please reach out to me at dramyrobbins@gmail.com. You can DM me on Instagram, and thank you for your continued support and your continued listening to the podcast. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.